Hi everyone, good evening. Um, so just to also inform everyone, we are recording this meeting and we hope that is fine with everyone. So good evening. On behalf of the NHRD and Mumbai chapter, I would like to welcome you and thank you for taking your time out to attend this session today. The session today, as you know, is on HRM in the era of workforce analytics. I'm Rashmi. I'm working with BioStoff right now, and I'm heading HR for the India healthcare business. I'm also part of the executive committee of the NHRD and Mumbai chapter. So let me start off maybe by introducing our topic of workforce analytics. In my experience of about a decade and a half in HR, I've personally always felt that relevant data is critical, firstly, to build my own conviction on whatever that I'm working on. And that then also helps me in getting alignment with our stakeholders, whether it be within HR or outside of HR. When we have relevant data, it moves on from just going by our gut or intuition, but backs it up with hard facts and insights. And that is what we are going to cover, and maybe a lot more than that is what we are going to cover today in our session. And to talk about this, there is no one better but our speaker, Mrs. Nita Rajesh. Nita has close to about 16 years of experience in human resources. She's played lead roles in organizational design, HR business partnering, talent management, diversity, human capital consulting, you name it, and she's possibly worked in it. She currently leads the candidate engagement team at Oracle. She's also a teacher as an elective on HRM and workforce analytics at IIM Udaipur for the past 2 years, and also does pro bono work for Wonder Girls Academy, which is modeled on the American Girl Scout. Quite a diverse background. So thank you, Nita, for joining us. On her personal front, she's married to an entrepreneur. She's hands-on mom. She's a hands-on mommy to very lovely kids. And when she's not working, she is spending time finding creative ways to sort of engage them in today's scenario when we are both working and schooling from home. Let me also introduce our moderator today. Our moderator is Mr. Pranav Mangat. Pranav is a first-year student at KISS, and he's also our KISS campus leader for the NHRD in Mumbai chapter. Pranav is a computer engineer. He's an all-India topper of UGC NET JRF exam in public administration in 2018. Congratulations for that, Pranav. And a former educator at Vajiram and Ravi, and also a member of an NGO, Gyan Prabodhini, which conducts training workshops in Northeast and Jammu and Kashmir. So a huge welcome to you, both Nita and Pranav, and thank you for doing this session today. Before we hand over to Pranav to really take this forward and take the session, I would also like to invite Vijayan sir. Vijayan sir is our president of the NHRD in Mumbai chapter, and he will just speak a few words about the upcoming national conference in February. And post that, Pranav will take us from there in terms of starting with the session along with Nita. So thank you everyone for joining, and hand it over to you, Vijayan sir.
Thank you, Rashmi. Welcome, Nita. Welcome, Pranav. I'm looking forward to an interesting session. I'm not going to take the thunder out of your spectacle today. NHRDN would be organizing a 3+1 4-day annual conference, 100% virtual, February 23rd, 24th, 25th, and 26th. The theme of this workshop is Metamorphosis of Human Resources at the Meta, Mega, and My realms. So we are trying to structure the 3 days into the Mega, Meta, and My. And on the 4th day, it is exclusively for students and academia. So more news would be coming in by the weekend. I urged all of you to participate. It is free. And if there's any one of you who would like to support with some degree of financial support to the chapter, because we are not taking any money from any other participants, the sponsorship inquiries are also welcome. Back to you, Rashmi. Back to you, Nita. Back to you, Pranav. Thanks.
Thank you, Vijay sir. And I hand over to Pranav to start.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Rashmi. It brings me immense pleasure and honor to introduce and host Nita here today. Nita has worked across different facets of HR in diverse organizations and industries. In a previous stint at Oracle, she oversaw global people program, especially in diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as campus recruitment and engagement. Most of us here are already aware of the challenges that gender diversity faces in terms of technological sectors, as well as the career breaks. And I'm so proud to introduce Nita today, who was instrumental in instituting and piloting a career relaunch program for women in technology in the cloud organization in Oracle. She also had a stint in investment banking. Before Oracle, Nita headed the HRBP team at Societe Generale, often nicknamed as SocGen, which is a French investment bank. She worked with leading brands such as Tesco, the British supermarket chain, leading the OD and talent management team there. She also has experience as a consultant. She has been. I request the participants to please mute yourself. Nita also had experience as a consultant. She has been consultant to leading IT, ITES, and real estate organizations in and around Bangalore while working with Ernst & Young. Nita graduated from XLRI in 2008 with a specialization in personal management and industrial relations. So today, we have a speaker who actually has a very rare combination. She is a leader in HR, as well as she is also a leader in the domain of analytics. So what explains Nita's love for numbers, even though she is an HR professional? So her love for numbers perhaps stems from the fact that she is a bachelor's in economics and business administration from Wesleyan College in Georgia, US. So after hearing so much about Nita, I'm sure the curiosity of the audience must have already enhanced many folds. So without taking much time, I request Nita to please take over the session.
Thank you so much, Pranav, Rashmi, and Vijayan sir. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I truly thank the NHRD and Mumbai chapter for hosting me today. I've been fortunate to have worked across leading brands, and the foundation for workforce analytics was perhaps laid in my first role in HR. I was actually hired by the workforce management team in IBM to oversee the MIS role within the recruitment function when IBM acquired Daksh. This was in 2000s, right? So there used to be hundreds of people being hired, and you really needed to get hold of the numbers, and you really needed to have a control over what was happening, how it was happening. Ever since, one common theme that has been for me has been integrating numbers to make the HR story a compelling one. And I'm glad that my efforts were and continue to be well appreciated by the leaders in the business, as well as my peers in HR. Thank you, Pranav, for hosting me today.
Thank you, Nita. So before we start the discussion, I would just like to let the audience know that we have a dedicated Q&A at the end. But I will request the audience that you please keep on sending the questions as and when they come with respect to whichever slide or the topic that Nita is discussing, so that we have the Q&A in a very efficient manner. So let's begin the discussion. So Nita, we often hear that data is the new oil, or some say that data is the new sunshine because of the renewable nature of data. But some of us often debate that where exactly do we see data to be useful? Is analytics useful at the macro level, or is it useful at the micro level? Although most of us, even the lowest rung professionals, might want to have data-driven decision making, but there is often a challenge that they cite, that can we actually integrate analytics in all the stages of business? So my question to you is it possible, or is it true that we can integrate workforce analytics at every stage of the employee life cycle? And if so, how exactly can we go ahead with that?
Yes, Pranav. So, long story short, you can blend workforce analytics to every single stage of the employee life cycle. And, again, I've used a few slides to, walk you all through what I'm talking about, right? So if you look at leading organizations, especially in the last 2 decades, many organizations have absolutely been using analytics at every single stage, right from attraction to development of employees to engaging them and retaining them within the organization. So in the hiring space, right from how you hire the right candidates, who do you reach out to, right, to up to who will actually join you, what is the probability of them joining you, predicting their performance in the role basis how they fare at different stages of selection, right? Helping new joiners develop the right skill sets, reducing the time taken to adapt into the new role, and beginning to perform optimally without too much of a learning curve. So that's really where, has really changed how people recruit, how organizations are recruiting people these days. Once you do that, retaining the right talent, we are optimum goal setting, very, very important. A lot of times people used to hire the right people, but they never really set the right goal. So a lot of analytics, a lot of historical data helps managers set the right goals for the right people. How do you set goals for campus joiners versus lateral candidates, right? How do you actually performance manage them? How do you ensure that your bright stars continue to perform well? How do you actually help underperformers, right? Data has genuinely helped managers, organization, business leaders, HR professionals through all this. The next idea, the next topic is also in potential identification and succession planning. Right in the 2000s, a lot of attention was only on these development centers, and we used to have individual development plans and individual development reports. But nobody would really track what happened to this person, let's say 6 months after this report was provided to him or her. What happened to them 2 years later, 3 years later? Did they really, did the succession plan really work out the way we had planned? Or did the person actually fall through? If the person fell through, what happened? Why? And how can we actually avoid such pitfalls for another person or for another role for the same person, right? That's another area where analytics has absolutely helped organization. Compensation and benefits, right? Absolutely one area where time and again, data has always been the foundational element. And the new area which is up and coming is assessing managerial capability. So it's no longer about look and feel and, oh, I think this manager is good and that manager isn't great. There's so much data, there's just so much evidence that organizations are analyzing to hire the right managers, to groom them, to absolutely retain them, and to make them future leaders, right? Engagement initiatives, especially in the COVID era, right? When everybody is absolutely sat at home. Analytics has been one element which has actually kept teams together and helped organizations and HR plan initiatives for their employees. And we'll talk more about that in the consecutive questions when you ask me. But typically, and in my opinion, I think analytics can be used to track and improve on just about every critical topic, be it optimizing your org structure, your span of control, how many people should report into a manager if you are in a complex process versus a simple transaction process versus different functions. Employee satisfaction survey, right? How do you actually use analytics from a year ago, from 6 months ago, from 2 years ago? Diversity and inclusion, absolutely one topic where there's just so much data available, and organizations are slowly and steadily moving towards analyzing it and actually coming up with action plans to better their environment, the whole culture, so that it promotes diversity and inclusion. And of course, retention. I think it's a very well-known fact, right? A lot of organizations have used early warning systems to hold back, to try and avoid people that they really want to retain from moving on from the organization. So this is really my response to your question, Pranav. So if you look at it, right, all this data actually is sat. So if you look at it, there's employee demographics, right? Even from the time from before the person joined the organization. And once the person joins the organization, you have so much data pertaining to their performance, their potential. How is this person interacting with the team? How is this person interacting with their clients, with their stakeholders, right? Compensation and benefits. How many times have you promoted somebody? What's the kind of hike? What's the kind of bonus you have paid somebody? What's the number of rewards and recognition that this person has actually earned, right? And also, business-wise, gender-wise, employee engagement, results. So which team has actually thrown up some surprises, during these surveys? All this data actually exists. All that we need to do is export it from the existing system, combine and clean them. Very, very important. Absolutely check for accuracy. A lot of times, I think what happens is we begin with the not so right data. The hypothesis is clearly not very right. And then from then on, obviously, if you don't get the foundation right, analyzing the patterns and the causal relationships absolutely gets tricky, this is key. Absolutely analyzing the pattern. What am I doing differently this year? What are my employees telling me differently this year than they did 2 years ago or last year? Absolutely trying to come up with causal relationships to build those predictive models for decision making, right? And if you do this right, you can absolutely, be able to decide whether to buy talent from outside. Are you going to be able to build talent from within? Are you, who should you invest in? Who should you promote? Who should you retain? Whether to retain. A lot of organizations, again, very, very common in the IT sector, especially, you have what we call the counter offer, very liberally used, right? But is this really the person you should retain? Should you really give him or her that 25% and 30% hike to stay back in your organization? Or is there an up and coming talent within the team that you're absolutely overlooking when you're trying to do something? So this is really what I think. There's just so much potential for data-driven decision-making in HR.
Thank you, Nita. So you touched a very crucial aspect, like especially the first years at HR in HR courses often hear of this build versus buy dilemma, which is one of the most fundamental dilemmas in recruitment. There are some theories or some proposals which talk about a war of talent as well, that tremendous war of talent is going to happen, and except for the culture, most other things in the organization can actually be copied by the rival organization. So in this regard, since you also have worked as the director of, you are already working as director candidate experience, can you just walk us through how data-driven recruitment and selection works and how it might resolve these issues?
Totally. So you're right. So the war for talent, right? And we've been hearing this for 20 years, mind you. So this is nothing new. So again, if you look at what analytics can do in the area of recruitment and selection, right from, the forecasting, right? Again, many organizations do this very well. So typically, that I hired 1,000 people this year. We need to hire 200 people this year, so on and so forth. The second bit where I think, again, there's a little bit of maturity that's being built in is checking the reliability and validity of the selection methods. Does this really work for me? Do I really need 2 rounds of coding tests? Do I really need 7 rounds of interview, for example? Am I actually, making my managers and my candidates fatigued by the time the process ends, right? So these are all, areas where organizations are already moving on and using a lot of analytics and survey feedback, right? The second, the third area is also role fitment in terms of the skill and experience match, right? Do I really need someone with 18 years of experience to be successful in this role? What was, the incumbent who was doing this role before? What was the kind of experience that he or she brought in, right? The other area where, again, a lot of attention is being drawn is bias in the recruitment selection. And again, right, every organization, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, we've really experimented a lot of aspects, right? So right from saying mask the name of the person on the resume to creating very neutral JDs, right? There's an organization that actually specializes in making your JDs sound neutral so that people apply to these JDs, so that they don't sound aggressive, so that they don't sound like you're looking for a specific, personality or a gender or whatever, right? So that a very good example that comes to mind here is Microsoft, right? So initially, like many other organizations in India and across the globe, Microsoft's campus recruitment strategy at one time involved hiring only from premium colleges, right? They would only select, software engineers from, Ivy Leagues and the other top-rated engineering colleges across the globe. And they looked at data, right? And over a period of time, they realized that 2 years after the campus joiners started performing in the role, they realized that the average performance, irrespective of what college these students came from, it actually averaged. There was nothing spectacularly different about hiring from the top engineering colleges vis-a-vis the normal colleges, right? So then they realized, they said, am I really right in recruiting a certain set of people from a set of colleges and paying them this premium? So right now, if you look at the campus recruitment strategy, Microsoft actually hires from across all campuses, especially in the US, right? So that's a classic example of how you can minimize bias in recruitment and selection if you use data from historical. Over and above this, again, what organizations have been doing traditionally is they offer rollout, the renege ratios, tracking these measures, right? Hiring efficiency. How am I doing on cost, recruitment costs, right? What is my source mix looking like? So is my agency versus my referrals, right? And typically, I think in the last decade, for example, we know that one of the biggest factors of your employee satisfaction and advocacy is really how many employees are referring their friends and family. We ask that in the employee satisfaction survey, as well as we look at our employee referrals. And we know that in a year where your employee referrals is suddenly dipping, you very clearly know that there's something that your employees are trying to tell you. Absolutely watch out for those, inputs, right? And last but not the least, in my current role, it absolutely, makes me and my team work towards the feedback that candidates give you right from the time when somebody asks for a reschedule to a no-show during an interview stage. That says a lot about your brand, right? What is the brand perception? And more importantly, through the interview stages itself, my team analyzes and they actually have a probability score that they draw out. And they tell the recruitment team, the key recruiters, they actually tell them that the probability of this person joining is less than 75%. The probability of this person joining Oracle is actually far lesser than 25%. So you see, a lot can be done in the recruitment space.
Thank you, Nita. I think this is one of the very crucial insights, that the superficial correlation between the brand of the college and the student is something that the recruiter should be well aware of. But again, even if we do go by data and do the right selections, that is, of course, a very good start and the cornerstone of our process. But then again, it's like the work half done. Once we are done with that, the next logical step would be the performance and talent management processes within the organization. Because you can attain the good employees by recruitment, but to sustain them, you need something much more than that. So how would you say that the organization can measure the performance and talent management using analytics?
Sure. Here, I'd like to talk about Walmart, right? Again, Walmart is one organization, especially in the last decade. So if you see their, the people analytics team in Walmart, they absolutely have had, the kind of studies done, and they put in a lot of effort into illuminating roles and career paths for their employees, right? So every time, the managers start talking about what next for these employees, they actually have a very specific plan that they have laid out for their top performers, for people that they want to retain, right? So what this ensures is improved performance, efficiency, and greater success for not just a specific set of people, but for clearly across the organization. So what has happened? So if you look at in the past decade versus now, if you look at Walmart's attrition rates, right, it's absolutely dropped. Employees absolutely, appreciate this approach, and they really know that this organization has my long-term interest in place. So if you look at the number of people in Walmart who've actually been there for more than a decade, it's absolutely one of the highest in the industry. And that's really what Walmart has gotten wrong. So if you gotten right, sorry, I'm so sorry. They've absolutely gotten this right, and they link performance to their selection assessment. They absolutely choose the key skill learning, right? What do I need to train this person as he or she takes up a new role, be it as a new joiner or be it as a person who's actually changed roles? What do I need to invest in this person so that he or she can be the best in what he or she does, right? The career that they choose. The next part is also in terms of predicting employee performance, linking a lot of profiles from the past to say that if you do this, this, and this is actually a metric for success, right? This is a, a recipe for success, right? Identifying leaders, that's another thing that many of the organizations that retain talent do very well. They, rather than using the traditional approaches of saying, okay, you should be in this role for 2 years, you can get promoted only after 3 years, they absolutely debunk all those traditional thoughts. They say, look at the person, look at the performance, look at the kind of potential that this person brings in, and look at the learnability. They track all this. They absolutely, track it for 6 to 8 months and say, hey, if this person has been performing at such energy levels and, displays this kind of potential, we need to do something for him or her. We're not going to treat special people like the general public, right? So that's one big thing. And the other bit that organizations also do increasingly is learning initiatives, right? Gone are the days where you track only the number of training days and things like that. These days, organizations absolutely hold the employee, the manager, and the HR partner accountable for learning initiatives. So they, again, right, classic cases of how organizations actually give away a budget for the employee to absolutely invest it in himself or herself, right? Especially top performers. So in my previous organization, even in India, for example, we used to actually give our top performer 1.5 lakh rupees. That's a lot of money, by the way, right? If you look at the learning budget. We used to give it to the top performer and we used to actually ask her or him to utilize it in the way that they best thought that they could, benefit from and invest in themselves. And we realized that this autonomy that you provide people, and in the background, we used to track it. We used to actually say that, hey, if the person self-initiates learning versus the organization initiated learning, what's the kind of investment we are making? What's the kind of benefits that we are deriving? And that data actually helped us tremendously in bettering these initiatives over a period of time. So that's really a lot of ideas that organizations can use in the performance and talent management space.
Okay, that was quite insightful, Nita. So even though we say like talent management and performance are super important functions in HR processes, but then again, we also have a perspective of Marx, which says that ultimately everything boils down to economics. So let me come to an important or supremely important topic of compensation.
I know what you're going to ask. Yeah, supremely important.
Yeah. So when it comes to compensation and benefits, HRs are really doing this number crunching and everything. And unlike other qualitative aspects of our work, we are actually very, very quantitative here. So would you please elaborate on this aspect?
Will do. And I'll begin by saying one sentence, right? So my ex-manager, I quote him, they used to say there's not one person who is happy with their compensation. That said, a lot of efforts. And again, this is one area I think we've evolved. So if you look at, how analytics can help here, with a lot of qualitative inputs that go along with it in the budgeting and forecasting, right? Again, this is one area we say that among all the things that the organization may or may not see HR as strategic, when it comes to compensation, somehow, right, we as HR professionals have escaped that guilt trip that they take you on, and they absolutely consider compensation as one of the strategic elements, and therefore, right, this is one area where we've invested a lot of analytics and a lot of insights that we use to arrive at it. So right from linking compensation and variable pay to employee skill, performance, potential, and tenure, a lot of organizations have actually evolved. So they say that if you have been in the same role for the last 3 years versus somebody who's performing at your level with just 1 year of experience, right? Clearly, who should you invest in? These are decisions that organizations make through a very detailed analysis, right? Data-based analysis. Benefits, a very, very important topic, and especially in today's day and age where, compensation is one element, but, the kind of benefits, monetary and non-monetary, that the organizations have been providing has come to the limelight, right? Again, in the last decade and a half, a lot of consulting firms have actually been helping us benchmark our benefits. And they would always tell us whether you're in the 75th percentile or the 40th percentile of the benefits in the industry. But what this data has actually helped us today is in also instituting the right rewards and recognition, right, from within the organization. So a lot of organizations today make decisions whether I should really give away stock options to my employees, or should I give them flexibility? Should I give them better health insurance? Should I invest this money that I have in absolutely providing what this population needs, right? So that's one huge analysis that organizations have been doing, especially in the last 2 years. Executive retention, again, another big topic, right? You see a lot of senior folks moving from organization, especially in the Bay Area. I think the role of RSUs, right, the restricted stock units, is huge in the last few years. The Microsofts, the Googles, and the Oracles of the world have absolutely upped their budget. So if you see, the fixed salaries are one component, but if you look at the real competition or the real race is in how the restricted stock units are being utilized. And of course, right, a very, very close watch on your stock price and what the market predicts, right? So that's one area. A detailed analysis, internal benchmarking. And on this topic, right, I'm absolutely going to talk about pay equity. This is one area where a lot of organizations, are working on, especially because in the US, for example, right, there has been an average of 100 charges of pay discrimination every year since 1997, right, ever since they instituted the Equal Pay Act. So, internal compensation reviews happen across salary bands, job roles, gender, ethnic group, age, a huge factor, another very sensitive area, right? Are we paying, the younger generation far more than we are paying the experienced people in their, 40s and 50s and so on and so forth? Tenure, so on one side, we want people to stay on, but equally organizations, it feels like it's better off for me to move organizations and up my salary, because if I stay on, somehow my current organization doesn't quite appreciate. At least they don't pay me, they don't show it to me in the form of a compensation, right? So that's one thing. So, again, these initiatives, if you really look at compensation in the lens of equity, it actually will hopefully save organizations millions of dollars lost in lawsuits, especially the class action suits that many organizations today face, right? So that's one area where people are using, organizations are using analytics to get answers to very important questions, like what is the variation of pay for the different genders, for different ethnic groups, right? How do budgeted salary increase compare for male versus female? What is the number of people I'm promoting, and what is the kind of promotion percentage increase I'm giving to women versus men, right? Things like that. I mean, there's just so much that you can look into and try and correct. And if these insights, and what is very important is, if these insights reveal that, your compensation practices are even remotely unfair, if you find any indication of discrimination, analyze this data further, right? Because you will be then uncovering so many issues before it results in fines and other legal trouble, right? This is my one big ask, right? When you're internally benchmarking, be very, very truthful to yourself, to your, HR head, to your business leaders. Because if we don't voice it out, it's just a matter of time before someone else comes and absolutely makes this public, right? So that's really one area. And of course, apart from that, external benchmarking, another area, organizations clearly keep looking at where am I vis-a-vis my, competition? What should I do to stay competitive, to attract as well as retain talent? And of course, one big area, another that especially right in today's day and age where we have these niche skills, we have these new parts of the, organizations we form. Sometimes we bring in people with a huge salary, unheard of at sometimes, right? So, a lot of times we are also working on cost justification and return on investment, right? So what was this person proposed? What was the kind of revenue increases that he or she had to bring in? Is that working on as per plan? What do we need to do differently, and so on and so forth, right? So these are really a plethora of areas within compensation that we can work on using analytics.
Thank you, Nita. When it comes to compensation, there is a saying that worker sells cow with a coffin. So inequity is something which affects them a lot. And loss of job can actually be considered as an economic death. Even the Supreme Court of India had said. I was just going through some of the questions as well. And there is almost a common theme of great resignation, which is seen frequently in the questions. That can analytics actually address this issue, which is very, very prevalent. I'm sure many of the student audiences are very active on LinkedIn, and this is also a common topic there. So can analytics help in retention and
it
reducing
absolutely
attrition?
Can, Pranav. And I'll give you again another example of Microsoft, right? So I was actually listening to the podcast of the HR leader for Microsoft, right? So she gave us a very pertinent example, right? So in the last 2 years, ever since COVID struck, right? The first, the very gut feel of a person is, oh, I'm not meeting my employees. So let's do these Friday social events, right? We call it the fun events, happy hours, or whatever you want to call it, right? So every organization suddenly started doing these social events, right? To increase engagement, to increase manager connect, employee connect, whatever they call it, okay? And then, Microsoft actually did a survey, and through their various touch points over the last, for one whole year, they actually realized that what people were actually looking for in terms of the connect was the manager to reassure them that their work was valued. So what has happened in the COVID era is that, every time I was in office and my manager walked past and I was working, either through his or her facial expression, or through a pat on the back, or during coffee, or during absolute team meetings, he or she would acknowledge the value that we created as a team. He or she would actually acknowledge that they wanted me in the team. And that has reduced. Because today, when I send an email, 90% chances are my manager is actually sitting in another meeting, right? Or in a Zoom call. He or she either has seen my email and not acknowledged it, or by the time, we got talking, she has forgotten to talk about that one email that he really wanted to say good job on, right? So that's a very simple example of how correlating employee satisfaction, motivation, and advocacy can actually lead to retention. So this great resignation, if you see, part of the issue is compensation. Just this morning, in fact, I think I read a report where they said that the great resignation, one of the biggest factors is the fact that we haven't invested in skill building for the employees. So if you look at why employees are leaving our organizations, it's not so much for the fact that someone's paying me more. It's actually with the hope that if I go join this organization, they will invest in my development and learning in a way that my organization has not done in the last 1.5 years, right? So those are really some factors. And the other bit is also how you have treated your employees through the last 2 years. Health and well-being, that has been one element, irrespective of the age, right? Organizations have absolutely been extremely nice or extremely brutal on, their employees. A simple thing like enabling office, infrastructure in the home. Those 2,000 and 3,000 rupee internet bills, I'm saving you a lot of cost by not using the transportation, by not using the infrastructure. It's another thing that organizations continue to pay the rent, the humongous rent through office space. But the fact that we've saved a lot of money, can you reuse them to actually, enable the employee better? And organizations that have actually done this proactively have seen that their employees are far more, inclined to absolutely pay back. And another ugly example equally is, some organizations have actually reduced, things like their, leave right? Be it in terms of bereavement leave. Again, I mean, this is not a time to be penny wise, pound foolish, okay? You cannot reduce your bereavement leave from 5 days to 2 days because the number of employees who have applied for this has increased exponentially. There is a time and tide to do that. Now's not the time, right? These are little steps through which you are actually communicating to your employees if they are valued or not valued. And that is what leads to predicting the kind of retention and reducing the attrition that your employees are going, your organization is going to face in the near future and for a few years to come.
Okay. Thank you, Nita. Actually, for somebody like me who is in first year, understanding the aspect that when we are trying so hard for getting good jobs, why is there sudden spurt of resignation and all? And the nuances that you explained is actually tempting me to ask you if there is any other area that you would like to cover, because looking at the subtleness of this issue, I think I might miss many areas if I just keep on asking you questions.
No, you're right. So again, the only two topics that I'll touch upon is, even on this slide, for example, managerial capability, right? Another huge area. So we've realized that just even having 2 proper one-to-ones with employees every month, right, increases the engagement levels, increases the productivity, increases their feeling of worth, right? That I am valued in this organization and that my contribution matters. So that's one more area where we have absolutely put in a lot of metrics for managers, right? To say if you are really being a good manager. And again, everybody knows this fact that people join organizations and they leave managers. So that is one area in which, again, a lot of analytics can be used. And last but not the least, again, just to kind of conclude the various questions that you asked is, how can you stay close to the people plan? Where did you begin with? And again, this is a very famous, problem that, across organizations we face, right? So they say, no, HR metrics are really not measurable. You know how it is. Nay, you can actually measure them, right? So every year, as an HR head, as a business leader, you need to sit together and actually have a very clear target. Where are you versus what you want to achieve? And through the year, use various metrics to keep yourself on track, right? That's the first and the foremost step that we can use analytics for. The second part is actually on the skill. So what is it that your organization is doing today? What is it that you want to do in the near future, right? 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Do you have the kind of skills? Or, conduct this gap analysis so that, again, takes us back to the buy or the build question. Equally, diversity analytics cannot harp on this more. What's your goal, right? What are the roadblocks? What is working today and what needs to be improved, right? If you give this a good thought and very, true, fair, analysis and, measurable, make it measurable so that you are true to yourself, right? It's no longer a lip service. Headcount analysis, again, another area where a lot of organization, every time you say efficiency, it actually boils down to, exactly this. What are your structures? What are your spans? What are the kind of reporting relationships? How can you be more efficient as an organization? If you do this right, the number of, people cuts that organizations make can be evaded because you have efficiency on top of your mind already. So it is no longer a cost related element. It is actually something that you can predict, you can foresee, and therefore you will either stop recruiting people or you will actually, make people perform more so that they don't lose their jobs, right? So that's really, a number of things that organizations can do when it comes to using analytics.
Thank you, Nita. Although we had a sort of pattern of, first finishing my questions and then taking up audience's questions, I could actually couldn't resist my temptation. I am seeing a very rebellious question that we as students read so much about, HR analytics across the globe and everything. But why don't we see that in organizations when we actually go and work there? So
So I will tell you, the answer is GIGO. I don't know how many of you all, again, a lot of engineers will resonate with this, but you all know what's GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, right? So that's a classic problem that HR faces, right? A lot of times, what we come up with, right, are so many challenges, right? Again, this is not the most number-oriented function within the organization, right? At least that's the perception, and many of us actually, prove it true. So again, right, the biggest challenge that we have is the multiple data sources, right? And it's anybody's guess, right? Even in the best of organizations, there are an average of 23 different HR systems, believe it or not. My application tracking system is very different from my recruitment satisfaction system versus my joining system versus my learning system. Compensation is on one different, vendor deals with that. Performance management is managed by somebody else. So, if you look at it, all this, it's like a khichdi to begin with, right? So then when you bring that data in many cases, it ends up being inaccurate, missing, or even bad data. There's a lot of times I cringe, but there are people who actually present something and suddenly if you add up, the percentages will be 104. And anybody knows that, you cannot have more than 100%, right? Misinterpretation of parameters, right? How did you mean attrition is 28%, or did you say retention is 28%, right? Non-uniform ways of collecting data. Again, and especially if you are a multinational with different geographies, the whole software that you use, the entry procedures that you use in different geographies is very, very different. Last but not the least, the fear, the uncertainty and doubt, right? HR folks ourselves, sometimes we fear the kind of complexity that it brings into our lives. We are all right. So that's the first, that's also one of the things. And more importantly, what this leads to is the time taken, right? So if you look at all these challenges, one of the biggest impediment for ourselves is the time taken to clean up this data. So, when you even hire an HR analyst, you hire a MIS person, this person will tell you that it will take me at least 3 months to clean up this data. And that in itself is okay, forget it. Looks like this project is too ambitious. I don't think we have this kind of time, right? So, and we have other priorities, so might as well focus on this, right? So those are really the first part, the garbage in related challenges. The second element is when you finally, so let's say we overcome all that and we actually get to the model. The other bit is, again, invest in the right skills. Please do not be confused. If you must get a data scientist, if you must get somebody who understands data, please hire that person, make that investment, right? Because lack of skilled or competent individuals actually kills it. Because if I go in front of my management team and if I cannot make sense of what I'm talking about, if I don't sound intelligent, if I don't, talk, a language that they understand, HR, and analytics projects get killed right there. The second challenge we have is incorrect hypothesis, using wrong data models, right? The third challenge is when you don't loop in compliance, right? We are sat in one corner and, in a very, what do you say? This is confidential. So confidential room mein baith ke, we are doing our own work. And then suddenly we hit a topic, we say, oh, wait a minute, I need compliance approval. And then suddenly compliance tells you, no, I cannot give you that data because I have told the employee that this is confidential data that will never get shared, right? So that, and then the other bit is also with all the data protection rules across different countries, especially like Germany and France. If you even want an employee name from those countries to come in India or the US, that there's a lot of protocols that you need to follow. So please involve your compliance teams, right? And last but not the least, it is just so fancy to say, hey, I'm going to use regression analysis, I'm going to do AI, I'm going to use ML. Are you mature? Is your data ready for these complex terms, right? Start simple, keep it simple. And then once you reach a certain level of maturity, at that point, probably use all these overcomplicated models is my other ask. And last but not the least is when you have the right data, you've done the analysis. I think what really fails is when we don't translate it to actionable insights, right? Again, so we did a fantastic analysis, and these are the 3 action points. But you know what? Suddenly my attrition has gone, beyond belief. So let's keep this aside and let's go to something else, right? Or we take partial action plans. Okay, we will do steps 1 and step 2, but we will not do step 3, right? Sometimes data throws very surprising, very shocking elements. So, that also sometimes says, you know what, I can't even show this data to the management team, right? What will they think about HR? So you either hold back or you hold back part of the analysis, right? So you do a half-baked job of taking the data back or the analysis back, poking holes at the data or the model if it is not the desired outcome. And this is classic across organization, right? If suddenly the leadership realizes that the analysis is telling them something very different from what they thought was the problem. No, ye ho hi nahi sakta hai. There's something wrong. You know what? Let's do this again. And employees are not, keen to give you inputs all over again, right? And the person who's working on this analytics, he'll be like, but I worked on this for 6 months. What happened, right? Why are you rubbishing all the efforts? The other challenge is also when your data is telling you something, but you're absolutely looking inward. You're not benchmarking it with other key metrics in the industry. Maybe this is true. Great resignation, a very common theme. So this is not just my organization that is facing X percentage attrition, right? Look at what your competitor is doing. Don't panic. This is not happening only to you, right? And last but not the least is when that part that you see below. Tons of data analysis. You go there and you have all these fancy presentations and fancy pivots and blah blah blah, but you don't have concrete action steps. So then everybody is looking at you and saying, so what, right? So these are really the GIGO challenges, I call them, and this is what is holding us back in HR.
Thank you, Nita. The last bit actually triggered me. Like numbers can be really scary for many of us, and when we see so much of numbers around, it's really difficult to make sense of the data. And this is especially significant when we have to communicate to the leadership and convince or persuade them over some proposal. So storytelling, I feel, is equally important or as important as data analysis, because that is perhaps the best way to communicate. But is it actually possible? Can you actually tell stories through data, or am I being too optimistic here?
You're being absolutely perfect. So look, this is a clear example of what is data-driven storytelling, right? So what you basically do is you use narratives and visualization to communicate your insights. So data-driven storytelling is nothing but connecting with your audience with a very neat narrative and using some good visualization. At least this is my perspective. So if you look at it, right? If you look at how we function as people, so we always say this, right? So if you go back to what you learned from your nursery, let's say, the one story or the one poem, right? Jack and Jill, for example, all of us remember it. The Thirsty Crow, we all remember it. But if I ask you to define Newton's second law, right? Some of us may be able to, but many of us will not be able to. So if you look at data-driven storytelling, it's really the practice of blending hard data with human connection, with human communication to craft an engaging narrative, right? What are the facts? And you use data visualization techniques, right? It could be charts, it could be images, it could also be words sometimes, quotes from your employees, right? Hard hitting. Someone's telling you something, right? Put it up there. And this will help convey the meaning of the data in a way that's compelling and relevant to your audience, right? So very, very important. The very first element that you need to get right when you're trying to do data-driven storytelling is the plot. What are the questions that you're addressing? What is the objective that you want to achieve? Why is this critical? Why now? Why not last year? Why not next year? The setting, right? What is the context in which your audience needs to interpret this data? What was it historically? What are the current processes? What is the industry benchmark? Right? This is how you position your data and insights for highest impact so that they don't rubbish it. Why is it that I need to take care of my renege rate? Because our renege rates are 2x that of Microsoft, that of Google, which is why you need to do it now, right? So what are the characters, which brings us to who are you addressing? Always remember, when you as a HR person walk in with that gold mine of data, you always need to know who is your audience. How will you tell them the story, right? What's the right tone? What are your audience's priorities? So if you're talking about technology brain drain, and your audience is only your business, right? Not your technology leader, but your business side leaders, clearly those insights are not going to help you achieve your goal, right? The next bit, once you get this right, this is almost 60-70% of the work that you need to do in the background. Once you have it right, you then use the right visualization. What is the right visualization method and tools appropriate for your data? Again, because someone used fancy pivot tables, pivot charts, don't use it. If your audience understands Word document, create Word document. If your audience believes in pre-reads, send them the pre-read, right? Use basic line, chart, bar graph, table. They are not overrated, right? And then if you really need to use those Power BI, Tableau, and Open Refine, or whatever fancy technology and tools that you've invested in, right? Once you get this right, how will I visualize? How will I make them visualize the story? Go back to, again, using this insightful data with a humane story, right? The detail, where you need to probably highlight, where you need to probably brush off, right? What is the desired action you want from them with relatable, high value content, right? And an insightful data set. Again, remember, I showed you GIGO. Remember GIGO. Zero clutter. Don't come to an audience and say, by the way, I also found out this, and by the way, I also found out this. Always have not more than 3 insightful points that you want them to focus on, right? So, with all this, if you do this right, your audience should be able to actually answer a few questions themselves. They should be able to make those informed decision making. Again, another very critical point. So if you look at Google, they began with this thing called Project Oxygen. So when they began with it, their goal was actually to only publish a white paper. They wanted to use analytics in a way where they would make decisions for managers. But if you look at it today, Project Oxygen has actually taken different forms and variations, and they actually have evolved into an organization that keeps all this data, but it helps managers make decisions themselves. So nobody makes decisions for Googlers. They make it themselves. So that is really the kind of synergy that you need to create. You need to be able for your data to support the kind of recommendation while increasing your audience's engagement. The audience should be able to tell you that, hey, having looked at your analysis, I think this is what I want to do for my team. And that is when your data-driven storytelling has actually been successful.
Thank you so much, Nita. I think we have a very, very enthusiastic audience on a weekday like Thursday. At this point of time, after working for the entire day, they are still here, and I'm actually really overwhelmed with the number of questions that we are getting. So, Nita, when you talked of Project Oxygen, and you also talked of storytelling being goal-driven or goal-directed, not forgetting what exactly do we want when we present data. So I personally have a thought that hypothesis is like the oxygen on which your analysis works. And we have a very interesting question from our own Vijayan sir, that how can we actually improve our ability to generate meaningful hypothesis using data analysis?
Say that again.
Meaningful hypothesis. How can we improve hypothesis using data analytics?
So again, for me, I think what, again, in my experience, what some of the good business leaders, good HR professionals do is they actually form very simple hypotheses, right? So you go with a very simple gut feel kind of a hypothesis. So again, hypothesis building is one element. What makes it simple and what makes it relatable, right? To a majority of your peers, will they actually, hold this hypothesis, right? So that hypothesis making is one element, but equally what has been very important is whether you will be willing to accept if this hypothesis is debunked, right? A very simple example, again, great resignation, right? Initially, when this began, a lot of organizations actually, thought that it was because of compensation related issues. They thought it was because employees really wanted that increase that they were not able to provide, right? In a year like this, where they had a lot of pay cuts, where they had no hikes. A lot of organizations went in with a hypothesis that it is because of this that I'm losing a lot of employees. But within 3 months, within 4 months, exit interviews and various other inputs started showing them it was the lack of flexibility, employee flexibility, and like I said, the lack of managerial connects that was missing. And last but not the least, skill investment, investment in skill building. These were the 3 top reasons employees actually cited for moving organizations, right? They were happy to actually stay back without a job rather than go to work for an organization that put them and their well-being after the organizational priorities. They were okay to take a pay cut as long as I had a manager who would invest in my development over a period of time. So that is a classic example where your hypothesis was completely debunked, right? And organizations were actually okay with taking that reality in. And we see a lot of organizations now proactively working on bettering it. So that's really my answer. And Vijayan sir, I hope this is satisfactory to you.
I think you did everything in such a big way that the number of listeners right now is very close to the peak attendance. So I'm practicing analytics in front of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Vijayan sir. Thank you so
Back to
much.
Pranav.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Nita. So, Nita, there was one more question which is a bit technical. Can you elaborate the nuance differences between prescriptive and predictive analysis?
Prescriptive and?
Predictive analysis.
Predictive analytics. Okay, yes. Predictive analytics, again, right? Very, very simple. And this is layman, laywoman kind of a thing. But predictive analytics is when you actually know, a simple example is my attrition in the last 2 years has been an average of 22%. The industry is at a 1.2x, and therefore I can predict that my attrition is going to be 26%, right? Simple. I mean, you just look at data from the past and you kind of make an informed guess that this is where I'm trending. My recruitment cost has been 100 rupees. Given all these facets, my recruitment cost this year is going to be 108 rupees. This is predictive analytics, right? Looking at your data, making some assumptions, looking at the reality, taking in benchmarking data from the market, and absolutely saying that I think this is where we end up. Again, classic example is how we track attrition, right? So YTD attrition, a lot of organizations by Q1, absolutely by Q2 can tell you where they will end the year, correct? That is predictive analytics. Prescriptive analytics is when you use this data to come up with some action plans that will mitigate some of these challenges in the future. So prescriptive analytics, again, in one of the slides, I talked about it. Skill gap analysis is one excellent way in which you actually use what, again, the world calls prescriptive analytics. You actually look into your organization, you look at your current realities, you look at where you want to be in the future, and you help the organization develop a strategy through which 2 years from now, you have a very set plan in place of how you're going to actually, look at your talent gaps, right? What is the talent gap that you will have 2 years from now? And what are you going to do about it starting today so that 18 months later, you're not caught unawares. For me, that is what is the difference between predictive and prescriptive analytics.
Okay, thank you, Nita. Actually, we have a issue of time's bandwidth, but looking at the energy of audience, I cannot resist but ask this brilliant question that when HR functions, most of the things are done through feedbacks, which are essentially qualitative. So how can we actually integrate this qualitative feedback into quantitative analytics?
So even that I'm going to debunk. So whoever asked this question, please don't get offended, but a lot of us have actually moved away from qualitative feedback. And I mean it in the very right sense. So again, employee satisfaction survey are one example. So over a period of time, right, we have been using as much numerical ways of taking in feedback. So we, again, a very simple example is, again, at least 20 years ago, 16 years ago, when I began my career, I remember taking a lot of qualitative questions, as well as there were always comment boxes where you could keep writing. And it was anybody's guess who was reading these comments and what they would do about it. Whereas today, if you look at it, a lot of science goes behind why we ask employees the kind of questions we ask. Right? A classic example is, I think it's one of those very, very good organizations. They say if you ask your employees exactly 8 questions, you will be able to gauge, their, absolute positivity about your brand, their advocacy about your brand, whether they would actually refer your brand to their friends and family. Right? So what we have done in the last decade is believe in less is more. And we have absolutely tried to take feedback as much as possible in numerical terms. Again, that said, what is very important, Pranav, is to also take these qualitative feedback, right? Absenteeism, right? Late coming. All these are numerical factors that you can assign to employee behavior, right? All this talks volumes about your culture, right? And what could be going wrong with the organization. Right? So I don't know if I answered your question aptly, but what I'm trying to tell you is gone are the days when HR would only look at qualitative feedback. These days, we have mood indicators that many organizations use. As the employee enters the organization, a lot of banks have what we call turnstiles. So right next to the turnstile, as you're swiping your ID card, they have actually put in a mood indicator, at least in the days that when we used to go to office, for example. That right there was a huge quantitative indicator to me as to what happens at the time the employee is entering my organization and what happens as he or she leaves the organization. So we are also moving away from a lot of words to a lot of numbers that indicate to me exactly how you feel right
now. So Nita, I think looking at the quantity of question, I request you to take just one more question, one last question from the audience. This question actually reminds me of Yes Minister series, wherein the surveys are manipulated in the way they want. You tell me the agenda and I can design a survey that will be appropriate to that. So the question says that data can be manipulated both ways. And this is very true when we see today's post-truth world with the things that have happened. So how do data analytics take care of this challenge? That data can be manipulated either ways.
That is true, and that risk remains. I will not deny. And most importantly, because this topic is about survey, please remember that every single employee, including me, you, are actually feeling what we call survey fatigue right now. Everybody wants to know how I'm doing. Right? So that said, I told you this at the very beginning. I think one thing that is very, very important, right, as an HR professional, as an HR leader especially, is to be open to the fact that it's like a can of worms you open, right? So if you're asking for feedback, if you're asking for data, remember that it is not going to be what you want to see. It could be very different from what you expected it to be. If you're open to that, then and only then open this Pandora's box. Otherwise, let it be, right? Because I think the biggest disservice people do to employees, organizations do to employees, is ask for that information and then rubbish it. is ask for that feedback and then say, I have no idea why they have rated me this way, forget it. Or ask for that data and say, no, this is not to my satisfaction, so I'm going to ask you again. It's like this, right? Right side se pucho, Hindi mein pucho, English mein pucho, my answer remains. Now, are you open to it? Are you going to do something about it? Then come and ask me, right? Classic case, we ask for feedback. But if the feedback is not what we want to hear, we say कि नहीं उसका mood खराब था, he gave me some horrible feedback, that's not been true about me. No boss, it is true about you. Now it is up to you whether you want to do something about it or you don't want to do something about it, right? So that's really my answer to this question.
Thank you so much, Nita. Thank you, audience, for being so patient and with full of energy and participating with so many questions, actually overwhelming the moderator. But looking at today's session, I cannot but resist the temptation of, quoting a snippet from my own vernacular language, that is Marathi. And considering that this is also NHRD in Mumbai, so I might just take the leeway of saying that there is a famous saying in Marathi, or perhaps a religious quote too, that Nalage Mukti Dhana Sampada, Santa Sangha Dei Sada. So this lecture actually personifies that, the translation being that I don't even want salvation if I can get company of good people and such good sessions, which can ensure that I grow in my knowledge. And this is perhaps the best blend that we see when academics, somebody who is also an industry expert and also an academician, in one single personality, what exactly happens? That we get an engagement of over 70 people on a working day like Thursday, at that too at 6:30, 6:40 p.m. So I thank Nita a lot for taking out time and providing us this brilliant session, which not only involved an overview of HR analytics as a process, but also going into the nuances and details of every process, right from recruitment to the favorite topic, compensation, as well as the another favorite topic of attrition and retention. With this, I conclude this session. I request the audience to stay connected with NHRDN for more such sessions in future. I also request the audience to please keep following us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and other handles on our social media so that you do not miss on the timings and the sessions that we plan for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very kind words, really humble. And again, thank you NHRD and Mumbai chapter for having me today. Really a pleasure being here, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Well done, Nita. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.